Okay. So can I ask where you're from?
I grew up in Virginia Beach, and then I moved here in '92 to go to college at VCU.
Oh, nice. What'd you major in at VCU?
English.
So can I get a brief biography on your roles just within and outside of the Broadberry?
Okay, so just like right now, what my roles are?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you meant biography, as in like how did you get started, kind of thing.
I was gonna get to that.
Okay,
so you can do both.
what I do.
You could play do both.
Do you want me to back? Okay, I'll start at the beginning
Okay.
and then come to the. So when I was in college at VCU, I got a job working at a club. When I turned 21, I got a job bartending at a club that was called Twisters, and I bartended there for a while, and I just sort of learned how to book concerts through observing the person who did it, and just sort of working in the place. And then I went on and worked there for 5 or 6 years. Was the bar manager, and then just sort of like learned how clubs run. And then when that place closed, I reopened it with a friend of mine, and that was somewhat short-lived, and we ended up moving shows to a club called Alley Cats that was downtown. And this was all like 22 years ago. And so since then, I've booked shows in like more than 20 different places, around Virginia. And then today So I had a company that was called the Trigger System then, and that was the company I had for 15 years. And then like 4 years ago or so, I merged my company with the Broadberry Entertainment Group, and that's my partner Lucas, and then he and I are the talent buyers for Broadberry Entertainment Group, and we book all of the shows at the Broadberry, Richmond Music Hall, the Camel, Ashland Theater, the Loud in West Virginia, and then a venue in Minneapolis that's called the Myth.
Interesting. Can I ask why Minneapolis?
Everyone does. It's a long story. It was a job that sort of fell in our lap from a friend of ours who was doing it prior.
Okay. And then I believe my professor mentioned you work at VCU too?
I'm a professor at VCU, associate professor at VCU. I have a PhD in media art text, which is kind of like English, but more like media based. I teach a course called Inquiry in the Craft of Argument.
Wow. How do you find time to balance the two?
I don't know.
You don't?
All I do is work.
Do you find them intertwining a lot? Because they seem to be two different ends of the spectrum, like the English and then the music.
Yeah, I mean, they are different, but there are some intersections between them. For example, we recently came to an agreement with VCU to produce the live entertainment that VCU does. So last year we did the Ram Fest, which was like a big hip hop show, and we're doing the same thing for them this coming year as well. So we sort of work with them in that way. And in the past, I've taught some classes at VCU in like podcasting, and music sort of plays a role in that. I would like there to be more intersections with it. I mean, I wish that there was like a role within the music school, but the music school is more performance-based at VCU.
Yeah. So your education at VCU, I guess, influenced your career location-wise. Was there anything more that influenced your choice to go into music venue work and stuff like that? I
never really made a choice to work in music. It was like a thing I did originally it was just like a job while I was going to school, and I made really good money, like when I was bartending. And then when I started booking shows, that was more, originally it was kind of just like a favor I was doing for people, and then it turned into like a hobby where like I did it on the side and I made a little bit extra money and I was good at it. And then it kind of turned into like a second job where I was making pretty good money at it and working a lot. And then it turned into this full-time thing that it is now and has been for quite some time. So I never really intended for it to be. It just happened.
Are you proud of the progress you made though, even though it just happened?
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't think of it that way very often, but yes, sure.
Okay. The Broadberry Entertainment Group, what would you say the mission or the ultimate goal is?
Our goal, the goal of the Broadberry Entertainment Group is to book as many concerts, as much live entertainment as we can in as many places as we can. And we have sort of grown a lot over the last few years, even though the indoor venues were closed during COVID. We started doing a lot of outdoor shows, and we do all the shows on Browns Island now. Those are, have you ever been to Browns Island? It's like a big park on the river downtown that holds.
I think I have.
Yeah. So it's just a huge outdoor space. It's very pretty, and we do all the concerts down there. And we I mean, our goal is to, do as many concerts and the biggest concerts we can.
Have you found yourself trying to target or like advertise to certain groups when you're trying to get live music, like certain genres, or just like certain people you're like, I feel like we want more of this sound live, or is it just like anyone?
No, we try to do as many different kinds of entertainment as we can. So, obviously, like, some kinds of music are more popular in certain markets or at certain venues than others, so we pay attention to that. But, when a booking agent sends us a band, we think about, like, what is the best market for this band to play in and which is the best venue for them to play in. Some venues are, like, more indie rock and some are more punk or metal or whatever, and so we sort of try to place the artist where we think they'll do best.
In your perspective, what do you think the majority of the music in Richmond is? Like, what are the main genres that you hear often from bands?
Indie everything. There's just not a lot. Like, there's not a big rock scene here, and there are in other places for sure. There's not here. It's not heavily supported by the radio for one thing, but also I think because VCU is such an art school, it's a very eclectic town. All kinds of indie seem to be most popular. So like we do. Mostly, I'd say if I had to like narrow it down, like we probably do more indie rock than we do anything else, but we also do like a ton of jam bands and Americana and punk and metal too. So everything. What we don't do a lot of is like hard rock shows, just because it doesn't typically do super well here.
Is that something that you'd like to hear more of?
No.
What would you like to hear more of? What are your favorite types of music to listen to?
I grew up listening to like punk and hardcore bands, but then as I got older, I listened to like more indie rock stuff now. So, but I still like the other stuff. I pretty much like everything other than country. I just have never gotten into. I don't love to listen to metal, but I book a ton of metal. So,
understandable. The music school I went to was what's called School of Rock. So it's supposed to be based around classic music, but we've had a ton of different show themes that have turned very indie, and even most of our teachers there, our instructors, are in like metal bands. So it's an interesting clashing of dynamics.
Right.
So I definitely understand that. Now I mentioned I wanted to focus on gender and the music industry. So what instances in your experience working for the Broadberry and just working for just like music venues and bars have been dictated or impacted by certain gender norms, or have you noticed just being a woman stands out? All of them? What have been like the most memorable, or like, memorable?
Good or bad?
Both. I'm leaning towards bad, but both. So I would say first, I think all experiences in life, are in some ways affected by gender. Certainly that's true in the workplace for women, and I think that's true in all workplaces probably for women, some more than others. The music industry is predominantly male. There are a lot of women who work in marketing and like other types of jobs within music, obviously, but in terms of talent buying, and specifically what I do, it is predominantly male. There's probably one woman for every 30 men, or that might even be generous, I don't know. So, I don't know, I feel like everything from the very beginning has been sort of related to gender. I feel like the first bartending job I got was because I was a girl, and back then it's very different than now. They dictated what you could wear or couldn't wear, or what they wanted you to wear or not wear, I guess I should say, for work. And it was the way that women were treated in clubs as bartenders back then was very different than the way that women would be treated today. That was in the mid 90s, and there wasn't a discussion going on about Me Too. There was no discussion going on about any of those kinds of things. And I worked in tons of restaurants before I was even 21, and just the way that women were treated by mostly male bosses was pretty derogatory, discriminatory most of the time. So it was just kind of accepted back then. So that played a role in it. But then also, I think when I was younger, working with tour managers who are predominantly male. To this day, we probably see more female tour managers now than ever before, but still probably one out of every 25 or so
Back then it was like I'd see one a year. If I was doing 250 shows, I might see one or two female tour managers. So I was like almost always just working with men. And sometimes that was to my advantage in some ways because they maybe were like more friendly to me or just like easier. But other times it was not that way. It would be the exact opposite. It was easy for them to be rude or condescending or take advantage, things like that. Now I think it still plays a role all the time because I work with all men for the most part, in terms of the talent buyers who I work with, and then I work with all mostly male booking agents, although there's more females now than there used to be. I think for female booking agents, it's also very hard for them because they are working all around men and have all the time, and so I think they often overcompensate for that, and can sometimes be really difficult. So it's just. Ask me your question again.
Just instances in your experience dictated by gender norms.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, like every aspect of my job is dictated by gender norms. I think a lot of times, to be more specific, I think I've heard people say that I'm like too straightforward. I still hear that all the time. I'm like too straightforward or abrupt or something like that. Whereas like if I said I have to constantly be conscious and cognizant of like of how I'm saying things, even though like my male business partners, colleagues don't have to do any of that, and they might say things in way more straightforward ways than me and be way ruder than me, but they would never be subject to that type of criticism. But like women are expected to be really nurturing and gentle and not straightforward, like very opposite of straightforward. So I feel like in terms of gender norms, like that's the biggest one that I face all the time.
That's definitely understandable. How do you think that any music scene, but particularly Richmond, would benefit from more female involvement if it weren't as, because you mentioned they get treated differently than men, obviously, and they're reacted to differently. But if there were more women involved and accepted, do you think the scene would benefit from that, or how do you think things would go differently?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure how having more women promoters or talent buyers, I don't know how that would necessarily impact the scene. I mean, maybe it would bring in more of certain kinds of music. I mean, maybe, but that would suggest that women like different music than men, and I don't think that's true. I don't know that it would have any impact on the surface. I mean, obviously, having more women work in any industry has a trickle-down effect on a million other things, but like, how would it affect the music scene here? I'm not sure. Yeah. I do think having like another job in music that is traditionally male is sound engineers. Everybody talks, if you say sound engineer, somebody says he right back to you because it's like so predominantly male. So having more women in that role would be visible to an audience, right? Like I'm not super visible because like I could be here during a show, but no one knows I'm the promoter unless they know me, right? But like you're the sound tech, you're up in the sound booth, and you're getting on stage and doing stuff. It's much more visible.
Of the music that you bring in, do you have like a vague percentage of how many are maybe like female-led bands or female majority bands?
I don't know. I mean, I'd really have to look to answer that, but I think there's definitely a moment now for women in music, and so there's more female touring artists now than there were in the past, for sure. I see it a lot more now. There's also a lot more people of color that are touring than ever before, or so it appears to me, at least. There's definitely still more male-dominated bands. I mean, it's probably like 30% female. But when you say female, do you mean like there's a female singer but an all-male band, or like an all-female band? There's not that many all-female bands.
Yeah, either way. Like I'm thinking female-led as in the singer, because normally people see the singer and they think that's like the identifying member or just majority.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I'm just guessing here, but maybe 30%, something like that.
Have you noticed any other circumstances, like social circumstances, like maybe race or class, that have impacted the Broadberry's work and the work of the group, or who they come across?
Well, I mean, in terms of ticket pricing, I think that, a lot of socioeconomic issues come up because ticket prices, like everything else, have been subject to inflation. Everything is very I mean, actually, ticket prices haven't gone up that much. What has gone up is like all the costs associated with putting on a concert, like everything from the people that you pay to the supplies that you need to the cost of food to get the artist rider. Like all of that has gone up a lot. Ticket prices have gone up a small bit. Of course, you need to have, you have to have a certain amount of passive income in order to be able to go to concerts on any sort of regular basis. The average ticket price here is at least $20, but we do shows that are $35 and up. So, and tickets at Browns Island start at around $35 usually and go up to like $75 or $80. So you have to have like a pretty good bit of expendable income to go buy, a $50 or $60 concert ticket. So in terms of like socioeconomic stuff, I feel like that's kind of where it is. It does, this isn't when I was growing up, shows were $5 and people would complain a lot. And real shows for like touring artists were $5 and people would complain if you tried to charge $7. And even though, time has passed, it's still like $5 back then was a lot cheaper than like $25 is right now. It just costs more these days. And so like the idea of like anybody of access to live music, and the notion that like anyone could just go out and see live entertainment is less common now, I think, than it used to be, just because like everything costs more money.
And I'm sure that's been impacted by COVID limitations too. And you also mentioned that earlier. Have there been any improvements, or not improvements, just changes you made in how this place is run because of the pandemic and life after?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything. So, in March 2020, we closed, which was like everybody thought it was going to be like a few weeks or a month, and then 2 months, 3 months, whatever. But we were closed for, a year and a half. And all of our venues were closed for the most part that entire time. There was sort of a period where we tried to do like socially distanced seating. We didn't do it here, but we did do it at Richmond Music Hall and at the Camel. And so, we would have like a very limited number of tables, and they were like 6 or 8 feet apart. And once you got to your table, you had to wear a mask till you sat at your table, and then you could went to the bathroom, you put your mask, and there were all these rules. It was very difficult to enforce the rules because people would come in and have drinks, and then like they didn't care, or maybe they just didn't care in general. I cared a lot about those issues. I didn't go to concerts at all. I didn't even start going back to concerts until like February of this year. So I didn't go back. I mean, we were open for many months and booking concerts before I felt comfortable. So I was very aware of those issues. We also did drive-in concerts outside during COVID.
Oh.
Our first drive-in was in June 2020. And the day of our drive-in, we moved from phase 0 to phase 1. And like phase 0, do you remember, it was like you couldn't do anything at all. So like the day of our drive-ins, Virginia moved to, the plan for the drive-in was literally that were going to pull your car up. It was going to be 6 feet from the other car, and you were only allowed to roll your window down this much. Because like back then, like no one knew. I don't know. And like, anyway, so that was the plan. And then that day we decided to let people, like, they could get out of their car and like sit, 6 or 8 feet from anyone else. But like we didn't serve alcohol. You couldn't get food. You couldn't do anything. You could like sit at your car and watch the show and get back in your car. And that was it. But at the time there was like no music anywhere, so people were like dying for it, and it was a good experience. So we started doing those. We did a bunch of them, and then we started doing the pod seating shows, which were like, you had like you went on a grassy field like at a park, and you had like a big square for you and 3 of your friends, and you had to stay in your square, and you could just sit there and watch the concerts. We did those until all the restrictions were lifted.
I have my own band that we actually formed during quarantine because everyone was missing live music, so we wanted to combat that by playing with other people ourselves. So we had another one of those like long concerts, like separated, people masked, and then there was one where we went out to a cul-de-sac in someone's like small neighborhood. So I definitely understood
you remember
the struggle of it, yeah, especially for music. It was very frustrating to deal with, but at least there was one outlet to get together with people like in a semi-safe way, but of course putting on large performances. Do you have any future projects coming up that you're excited for?
Just mostly like our big outdoor shows, where we put a lot of time and effort and money into those. With the last two that we have are this coming weekend. We have Mount Joy and then Pusha T on Friday and Saturday at Browns Island. And then, I mean, we're already working really hard on next summer's outdoor shows because you book things like a year, or 10 months in advance, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, like our main projects are really focusing on like doing as many outdoor shows as we can.
And I'm gonna go more like very simplistic route, but what's your favorite experience with the band, or what's the best, I'm trying to think of the word, just like, I'll go with experience again, working with a band that you've helped put on? Or worse, either way.
Worse is easier to answer.
Okay, thank God.
And that goes back to gender too, so that's probably more what you want to hear about. I won't say who the band was, but I'll tell you the story of what happened. This has only happened to me once in like the 22 years I've done this. But I had one tour manager who was like aggressive to the point of almost being violent with me. Something happened. I don't know what was wrong with him, but before the day of the show, like when we were just talking over email to get everything organized, he was just kind of acting like over the top about everything and like very, very angry, but nothing was wrong. And like to the point where we felt like at the venue that we had to have a security guard there when the band loaded in, which is like unheard of. You don't ever do that. But he was acting so irrational that we felt uncomfortable. And so we had a security guard there at 11 in the morning when they got there. And he came in, and I think he was having some kind of a psychological break because maybe he was bipolar, I'm not sure. But he came in and just started screaming and kind of like waving his arms around and not making any sense. And the security guard had to take him outside and like try to calm him down. Anyway, long story short, we got through the show, but barely because of how he was acting. And when it was time to settle and like pay the band, I went and sat down in a booth. I mean, we were closed by that point. I went and sat down in a booth to do it. And I was kind of just sitting in the booth with my working on it, and he came and sat down next to me in the booth so that I was locked in, and then would not let me out, like quite literally, and started like yelling at me and harassing me, and there was nothing wrong. There wasn't like actually a problem. And so anyway, it got to the point where the security guard had to come over and quite literally lean into the booth and lift me out of the booth because he would not let me out. And it was really the only like aggressive, almost violent thing that I've ever had happen. But it scared me a lot. And I've never forgotten it.
Wow. Did the band react to anything he did, or?
No, a lot of times bands don't even see or know what's going on with their tour managers. It's a huge problem because the tour manager is hired to represent them. And we don't really talk to bands. We only talk to tour managers, right? And so, like, if the tour manager is good, they represent the band well. And if the tour manager is a jerk, they represent that band badly. And, like, what you remember as a promoter or a venue is the tour manager. And so I will always think of this band that way because of this person that they hired. I mean, I don't know if they knew. I can't imagine they didn't because there was clearly something going on with him.
That's something new to me, thinking of the manager as the person that I associate with the band.
So it's not the band's manager that you see, it's their tour manager. So that's like the person they hire to, be in charge of all the organization for the entire tour. Like to make sure that you're there on time and everybody everything, all your food is there and that you get your money at the end, and just to organize everything. That's the person who we talk to.
Have you come across bands who, manage themselves a lot?
Rarely.
Really?
No one really does that. I mean, like a small band that doesn't have a booking agent, a local band, right? But a local band would do that. Like a local band who's going to go play a few shows, over the weekend or for a week would manage themselves. But once you have a booking agent and you're touring, and we really only work with booking agents, once you're touring, you have to have a tour manager because it's just too much work. And also, like a lot of bands either don't have the organizational skills or don't want to have the organizational skills. Like that's not what they're there to do. They're there to perform. So like, they really do need someone to kind of oversee everything. And there's a lot of details to, if you leave one town an hour and a half late, you might miss your next day's show, So you have to be organized.
How long do you see yourself being within the Broadway Entertainment Group, just working within this field?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have any plans to stop working in this field. You know, it's hard to imagine like being really old and still doing this, but everyone says that and everyone does. You know, I feel like every person I know a lot of promoters who are older than me, and for 20 years they've been saying that there's no way they're going to be doing it in 5 years, and they're still doing it now. So,
do you have any plans to expand to any other buildings or venues?
yeah, I mean, our goal is to book as many venues as we can. So, I mean, we definitely are working on that all the time, like reaching out to new venues. And so we book 5 venues. We do all the booking for the 5 venues that I mentioned, or the 6 venues I mentioned, but then we book like another 6 or 7 venues as outside promoters, meaning like we don't do all their booking, but we book some of their shows. So we are always trying to add venues, for sure.
Okay, and sorry if you've already said this, but do you just stick to music, or is there also like dance performances or like theater?
We do some comedy, some podcasts, you know, not really theater so much, just because that's just not what we do. But like, you know, we're open to like pretty much any kind of live entertainment.
Okay. So podcasts, how do you do that?
So there are some podcasts that actually tour, and what they do is, you know, do you listen to podcasts ever?
I have occasionally.
So it's like if you listen to like one podcast a lot and, you know, follow it the way you would like a series on Netflix or something. If you then you like get to know the hosts and the characters in it, and people get, especially those that are like nonfiction, people get very involved in them in the same way as they would a TV show, right? And they want to come and like meet the person and see them. So what this isn't like super common, but it happens more and more now. Podcasts will tour and like they'll come and set up on the stage and they'll do like a live recording of their podcast with like an audience that's watching them do it. And then there's usually like a Q&A with the host and stuff, so you can like ask them questions and talk.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never thought about that. Okay. Well, do you have any questions for me about what I'm doing, why I was inspired?
Are you just writing a paper with all of this?
Yes, it's just gonna be like an ethnographic
observation.
analysis. Yes, thank you. Some tongue twisted sometimes with those words. Yeah, it's not due for a couple of months, so I think I have some time. But anything else?
No, not really. But if you have other questions, you can feel free to email me or whatever afterwards.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.